A country smaller than Maryland, no gold, no army worth mentioning, half its land stolen back from the ocean, one dike at a time. For about 100 years, that country ran the world's money. Its currency was the currency everyone else trusted. Its biggest company was worth more than the kingdoms next to it. Its bankers decided who got to borrow and who didn't. Then it lost all of it, not in a war that leveled its cities, not in one bad decade. It slipped away, one comfortable decision at a time, until the richest economy on earth woke up broke. This is the Dutch Republic, and I need to say something before we go further. This isn't just a history video. Economists and central bankers keep dragging this exact story back out when they talk about the United States. I'm going to show you exactly what happened to the Dutch. Then I'll lay the American numbers next to it, and you can decide how much of the pattern actually holds and how much doesn't. Stick around because the ending isn't the one most people expect. In the late 1500s, the northern Netherlands was fighting an 80-year war for independence from Spain. No natural resources, no large population. What they had was water, ships, and a radical idea. Let ordinary citizens fund the ambitions of the state and share in the profits. In 1602, the Dutch merged 7 rival trading companies into one, the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. It wasn't a normal business. It could raise armies, sign treaties, mint coin, and govern colonies on the other side of the planet, all under a private boardroom seal. To fund it, the Dutch opened ownership to the public, the world's first true share offering, and Amsterdam built the world's first stock exchange to trade it. The basic architecture of modern finance was assembled on Dutch canals. In 1609, the Bank of Amsterdam gave merchants a stable place to store and move money, an early central bank for world trade. Because Amsterdam had the deepest, most trusted markets in Europe, the guilder became something money had never quite been, a reserve currency held by merchants across the globe. By the mid-1600s, the Dutch merchant fleet was bigger than England, France, Spain, and Portugal's combined. A country you could fit inside, a single American state, had become the financial capital of the world. It felt permanent. The crack didn't come as slow erosion. It came as a single, catastrophic year the Dutch still call by name the ramp jar, the disaster year, 1672. France, England, and 2 German states attacked almost simultaneously. French troops overran 3 provinces in weeks. The nation's leading statesman, Johann de Witt, was blamed for the catastrophe and killed by a mob in The Hague. The Dutch survived 1672, but the feeling that they were untouchable never fully came back. 4 pressures did the rest. The first was overextension. A global empire is expensive to defend whether or not it's still profitable. And as England and France copied Dutch financial techniques and shut Dutch merchants out of their own markets, income shrank while costs climbed. The second was the rentier turn, the part of this story that should genuinely unsettle you. As it got harder to profit from building ships and running factories, wealthy Dutch capital stopped funding production and started simply lending itself out. From the 1720s through the 1770s, Dutch investors became one of the largest sources of financing for the British government's own debt, the very rival displacing them. The wealth was still enormous. It had just detached from whatever created it. The third was rot at the core. The VOC slashed pay for its overseas agents, then quietly tolerated the smuggling they used to make up the difference. Here's the deceptive part: none of it showed from the outside. As late as 1781, less than 20 years before the company ceased to exist, it was still paying dividends near 18%, still trading near record highs, distributing the appearance of health, while the substance underneath had already rotted out. The fourth was the shock that finished the job. When Britain's American colonies revolted, the Dutch quietly financed them. Britain declared war in 1780, and the Royal Navy, partly strengthened by decades of Dutch lending, swept Dutch shipping from the seas. Trade into the Netherlands collapsed by more than 70% in a single year. As the VOC bled out, the Bank of Amsterdam made a fateful choice. It began quietly lending the company freshly issued guilders not backed by metal in the vault. When word got out, depositors rushed to convert paper into hard silver before it was too late. In 1795, French armies swept into the Netherlands, opened the bank's books, and the public saw how little metal actually remained. The guilder's value cratered almost overnight. In 1799, the VOC, once the most valuable company the world had ever known, was formally dissolved, bankrupt, its debts absorbed by the state. The empire didn't fall to one blow. It fell because comfortable people for a century kept choosing the easy path, lending instead of building, until there was nothing left to defend. So why does a 2.5 century old story keep coming up about America? Because investor Ray Dalio, mapping what he calls the big cycle of rising and falling empires, points out that the guilder, the pound, and the dollar each became the world's reserve currency near the peak of their nation's power, and each time that peak already held the seeds of decline. Reserve status lets a nation borrow cheaper than anyone else. That privilege becomes temptation. Hold that up against the facts. As of mid-2026, U.S. national debt has passed $39 trillion, a level forecasters recently expected closer to 2030. Debt held by the public sits above 100% of GDP, the highest since World War II. Here's the figure historians find most uncomfortable. Net interest on that debt is on pace to hit roughly $1 trillion this fiscal year, and in the first quarter alone, interest payments of about $270 billion already exceeded the entire defense budget of about $267 billion. It's the first sustained period in modern history where servicing old debt costs more than the military meant to project the nation's power. Historian Niall Ferguson calls this threshold Ferguson's Law. Any great power spending more to service its debt than to defend itself risks ceasing to be a great power. Now the currency itself, the dollar, made up roughly 71% of the world's official reserves at its peak around 2000. By 2025, that share had slipped to around 57%, still dominant, but the lowest in decades. Rising debt sustained by reserve privilege, check. A reserve currency losing global share, check. Expensive global commitments questioned at home, check. An economy financialized, where fortunes are made trading assets instead of building things, check. But here's the problem with the comparison. When the guilder fell, the British pound was already waiting, backed by a nation actively out, innovating and out, trading the Dutch. When the pound eventually faded, the dollar was right there. A reserve currency doesn't collapse into a vacuum, it gets replaced by something stronger. Right now, there is no clear successor. The euro carries its own debt crisis baggage. China's renminbi is too tightly controlled to be a safe place for the world's savings. You can't dethrone a king when there's no prince ready for the throne. Britain is the useful bridge here. 2 world wars buried it in debt, and the pound's dominance passed to the dollar at Bretton Woods in 1944. But there was no overnight collapse. The pound is still a respected currency today. Britain's decline was real and gradual, not catastrophic. The Dutch collapse, by contrast, was triggered by an outright military defeat that severed their trade routes within months. America faces no equivalent shock right now. and through 2025 and 2026, there's been no broad stampede out of American assets, the kind of sell-off you'd expect if markets genuinely believed the dollar's reign was ending. So the structural parallels are real. But history doesn't repeat with the precision of a machine. It rhymes, and rhymes are loose. If the pessimists are even partly right, this probably looks less like the sudden Dutch implosion and more like the slow British handoff. The deepest lesson from the Dutch fall isn't that empires are doomed. It's that decline is a choice as much as a fate. The Dutch didn't have to keep financing their own rival while their own industry withered. Every one of those was a decision made by comfortable people who assumed the good times were permanent. Picture that exchange floor in Amsterdam in 1602. Merchants shouting prices for a company that would reshape the world's financial system. 2 centuries later, that company was gone, and the bank that anchored world finance had quietly collapsed under the weight of its own secrecy. The pattern is visible, the outcome is not. If you had to pick the one moment that mattered most the disaster year, the rentier turn, the corruption inside the VOC, or the war that broke the bank, tell me which one in the comments. And if you want more of this, subscribe for more from History Decoded.